Samsung's Galaxy S23 Ultra, the top S-series flagship in this year's lineup. While the lower-tier S23 phones aren't too different from last year, the Ultra brings an exciting 200-megapixel main camera. I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's see what the S23 Ultra is all about in our full review. The S23 Ultra builds upon what we saw with last year's S22 Ultra. It's a large, squared-off smartphone that is the spiritual successor to the Galaxy Note series. And just like a true Note, it has pressure-sensitive stylus support, and the bundled stylus tucks into the phone. Compared to last year, there are just a handful of improvements. There's the new high-res camera hardware, an overclocked version of the latest Snapdragon chipset, and an upgraded vision booster for the display, and that's about it. Alright, maybe there are a few other details here and there. The design has been tweaked, a little bit. Both the back and the front are protected by sturdier Gorilla Glass Victus too. They again curve into the armor aluminum frame, but the curve is less pronounced this time around. Also, there's a heavier accent on the rings around the cameras. Like before, you get IP68 rated water and dust protection on the S23 Ultra, as you'd expect from a Samsung flagship. But this year, Samsung used more recycled materials in the manufacturing of the S series, in order to be more eco-friendly. Besides the screen glass, the S23 Ultra's display is basically the same as last year. It's a 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED with a QHD resolution and a 120Hz refresh rate. The picture quality is great, extra sharp thanks to the high resolution, and of course quite contrasty. The color accuracy is spot on, and there's support for HDR10+. You don't get 10-bit color on the S23 series though. When it comes to max brightness, the S23 Ultra's display measured basically the same as last year's model. We achieved 830 nits maximum with a manual slider, and that boosted to 1270 nits in auto mode when in bright conditions. The refresh rate is also handled in a similar fashion as before. You get the full 120Hz when swiping around to smooth out movements on screen, and when the screen is idle, we saw it dial down to as low as 24Hz, though Samsung claims it can go even lower due to some low-level system tweaking. There is one new development this year, and that's with the Vision Booster. It automatically adjusts the screen's color and contrast based on ambient lighting. It now covers 3 different lighting conditions. The S23 Ultra has a pair of stereo speakers with Dolby Atmos support, and this is where we see another upgrade. They're louder than last year, and the sound is richer, with clear vocals, nice treble, and some noticeable bass.
I'm wide awake, but you're a nightmare.
You can wake up and unlock the S23 Ultra with a responsive under-display fingerprint reader. Storage on the S23 Ultra isn't expandable through microSD, but you can get the phone with 256 or 512 gigs on board, or even a whole terabyte. But if you need even more space, you might be interested in today's sponsor. Terabox is a cloud storage provider with over 100 million users worldwide, and their free cloud storage plan is huge, with up to a terabyte available right off the bat. No matter which device you're using, you can easily access your Terabox storage through a web browser or the Android or the iOS app. There are plenty of features you'd like to see from this type of service, like automatic backup, real-time sync, and video playback within the app. Terabox is ISO IEC certified for cloud data security, and thanks to end-to-end encryption, your file transfers are well protected. Your account is password protected, and there's support for 2-factor authentication as well. And on top of that, you get a personal vault with its own separate password protection for your extra sensitive files. It can even be linked to biometrics too. Like I mentioned, the lowest tier is free, and of course you can upgrade from there for even more space and other perks too. So if you need some cloud storage, we'll leave a link for Terabox in the video description. We've already touched upon the S23 Ultra's active stylus support. It hasn't changed a whole lot since last year, but it's still a really unique feature. This is one of the most advanced stylus setups out there. You get 4096 levels of pressure sensitivity, and low latency like last year. With the Air Actions functionality, you can also use the S Pen as a remote for things like the gallery, web browser, or camera. Quick Note lets you add entire web pages as scrapbook items in Samsung Note, if you're using Samsung Internet Browser. The S23 Ultra can translate your handwriting into text, with support for 100 languages. And Screen Translate can translate single words into a pre-selected language if you just hover over them. Screen Off Memo lets you take out the stylus and write notes on the fly without needing to wake up the phone. And Smart Select allows you to take differently shaped screenshots, extract text from them, or pin them on the screen. Besides the S Pen functions, the interface itself is the same as on the other S23 phones. It's Samsung's One UI 5.1 on top of Android 13. It's even more customizable than previous versions of One UI, and is faster too, thanks to behind-the-scenes optimizations. We have a dedicated video about One UI 5 if you'd like to find out more about its specific features. Like the rest of the S23 family, the S23 Ultra is powered by the Samsung exclusive Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy. It's a version of the flagship Qualcomm chipset with an overclocked CPU and GPU. It provides clear improvement in both CPU and graphics performance compared to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 and last year's models. Plus, there's support for advanced memory technologies like UFS 4.0 and LPDDR5X RAM. In benchmarks, the S23 Ultra's performance is impressive, leaving last year's flagships in the dust. Heavy gaming is a breeze here, and there's more than enough power to multitask without a hitch. And on top of that, the S23 Ultra's thermal management is surprisingly decent, and it did a good job throughout our 1-hour-long stress test. The Ultra's battery capacity hasn't changed this year, it remains at 5,000 mAh. Still, battery performance has improved over the previous model, thanks to the more power-efficient chipset. The S23 Ultra scored a great endurance rating of 126 hours in our tests. The charging is rated at 45 watts, like last year, and again there's no adapter included in the box. With a proper 45-watt Samsung adapter, we were able to charge the S23 Ultra from 0 to 68% in half an hour. There's also support for wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. Now we're finally onto the cameras, which are perhaps the main attraction of this phone. The star of the show is the new main camera, which features the 200-megapixel Samsung HP2 sensor. It bends 16 pixels to 1 to create 12-megapixel photos. The HP2 features super quad-pixel autofocus, an upgrade over the dual-pixel tech used in other Samsung phones. It can detect both horizontal and vertical phase changes, so it's more dependable in various situations. Another improvement is that Expert RAW is now integrated within the main camera app, instead of being a separate one. Besides the main cam, the other rear cameras of the S23 Ultra are the same as before: a 10-megapixel 3x telephoto, a 10-megapixel 10x telephoto, and a 12-megapixel ultra-wide cam. During the day, 12-megapixel photos from the main cam look great. The improvement isn't night and day over the S22 Ultra's photos, but there's a noticeably more vibrant rendition here, with vivid colors, brighter shadows, and extra warmth. The dynamic range is excellent. When looking closer, you'll also notice that the S23 Ultra's output is noticeably sharper, all the way to the corners of the frame. The noise levels are also even cleaner. The S23 Ultra's main cam can also shoot high-res photos, and let's start with the 50-megapixel ones. These provide a bit more detail and definition, and we'd say that comes with no penalty in dynamic range. 200-megapixel photos are more of a tough sell. The detail benefits don't outweigh the inconvenience of the huge file size, and the dynamic range suffers a bit. Portrait photos taken with the main cam are good, with excellent subject detection and warm skin tones. Overall, they don't seem to be a huge improvement over last year though. Portraits taken with the 3x telephoto also have great edge detection, and the quality is notably sharper and more detailed than the S22 Ultra's. The 3x telephoto's daylight shots are nice, and comparable to last year's, but the processing has changed a bit. The noise reduction has been toned down, so images are a bit grainier, but the detail is crisper. The HDR, on the other hand, seems to be more aggressive now, resulting in a brighter image overall. With the 10x zoom camera, it's much the same story. There's solid detail, a slight increase in noise, and an overall brighter appearance now. The ultra-wide camera's photos have better noise performance this time around, but otherwise they're the same as before. The detail level is very good, colors are likable, and the dynamic range is plenty wide. Plus, since the ultra-wide has autofocus, you can take close-up macro shots with it, something that isn't possible on the other S23 models. If it detects low light conditions, the S23 Ultra can apply its auto night shot processing to its photos. Taken with the main cam, these have abundant detail, minimal noise, and well-preserved colors. The exposure is balanced, highlights are well-preserved, and you get good development in the shadows. For dimmer or more contrasty scenes, you might want to toggle on the dedicated night mode. It provides benefits in the shadows and light sources. There is some extra sharpening though, which can look artificial. Here's a low-light comparison to the S22 Ultra. The new model brings improved detail with better definition and less noise. If you're zooming at night, this is what you get at 3x, with the auto night mode engaged. It's alright, but the output is a bit blotchy. Toggling on the dedicated night mode clears up some issues. The photos are a little darker overall, but there's less noise and sharper detail in the shadows. The dynamic range is a bit improved too. The 10x telephoto is a bit less reliable in the dark. If the light is too low, you'll get a digital crop from the 3x camera. When there's some light to work with, you will get output from the 10x camera, but images still turn out rather noisy. The dedicated night mode cleans things up, and you can get some decent results, but it can only save the scenes that are bright enough not to resort to the other camera. The ultra-wide camera's low-light performance is decent. With the auto night mode active, you get good dynamic range, well-preserved colors, and good detail in better lit areas. Shadows do end up noisy though. Toggling on the dedicated night mode makes a nice improvement. These shots are cleaner and better detailed, and the dynamic range is boosted too. Just like the rest of the S23 lineup, the S23 Ultra has a new 12-megapixel selfie cam, which has autofocus. While it may seem like a downgrade on paper from the 40-megapixel selfie cam in last year's model, the quality isn't too much different. The dynamic range is excellent, the detail level is good, and the colors are accurate. The noise does seem to be handled better though. Now on to video recording. The S23 series supports 8K video capture at 30 FPS, rather than 24, and the S23 Ultra uses the full width of its sensor for recording, unlike last year which was cropped. The results are sharper and more detailed than the S22 Ultras as well. 4K videos from the main cam look just as good, with great detail and no noise. The dynamic range is respectable, and the colors have a likable amount of saturation. 4K videos from the 3x telephoto cam look good. They're nice and sharp, and pretty much the same as last year, besides some minor tweaks. 10x zoomed 4K video is not quite as sharp, but otherwise the quality is solid, matching the other telephoto cam. The ultra-wide cam's 4K videos are a mixed bag. The colors and dynamic range leave little to be desired, but the sharpness and detail seem to be a bit less than last year. There's electronic stabilization available on all of the cameras, and it does a nice job at smoothing things out. In low light, the main cam shoots excellent 4K videos. The dynamic range is wide, with well-contained highlights and developed shadows. The colors are also well preserved. The results are also sharper than what the S22 Ultra is able to achieve. The 3x telephoto cam isn't a fan of the dark, and the video is rather noisy. It's still usable though. At 10x zoom, the quality degrades even further. Nighttime 4K videos from the ultra-wide cam are decent. While they're not as sharp and detailed as those from the main camera, the colors and dynamic range are still good. So that's the Galaxy S23 Ultra. There's a lot to like here. You get all of the features that made last year's Ultra so good, plus there's improved battery life, a more powerful chipset, and a new cutting-edge main cam that's one of the best out there. None of these are exactly game-changing, and it would be hard to see people upgrading from last year's model, but the S23 Ultra is the best that Samsung has to offer right now, and if you can afford it, it's definitely worth recommending. Thanks for watching guys. If you're looking for alternatives to the S23 Ultra, one place to start could be the Galaxy Z Fold 4, or you could consider the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Let us know what you guys think, and I'll see you on the next one.